Hello and welcome to this quick run through of some of the physics possibilities that are open to all of the game creators in Crayta. If you're interested in using some physics in your game, you might need to dabble in a little bit of scripting in order to do that. Here in this game, I've got a launch pad that I've created here, and it's fairly straightforward. It's got a trigger placed on top of it so that when a player enters the trigger, I actually have some code that fires when the player enters the trigger and shoots the player into the sky. The code itself is here in this launch player script, and if I open that, you can see it's quite relatively straightforward. All we've got is when the player enters the trigger, so on trigger enter function fires when something enters this trigger. It passes through a reference to whatever has just entered the trigger. So I've captured that in a variable called other, also called an argument when it's between these brackets here. And then because I've captured the player when they've been passed into this function, I can actually use them to send a launch function. I can call the launch function on the player and send that the direction that I want to launch them, which is this launch vector here. So you can see the launch vector is these three numbers, and this is a direction that I want to send the player. So this is 0 on the x-axis, which is left and right, 0 on the y-axis, which is forwards and backwards, and then I want to apply the force of 3,000 on the z-axis, which is up and down. So no force left and right, no force backwards and forwards, and 3,000 up and down. So when a player walks on the trigger itself, they are launched into the sky. It also plays a sound, which I've set up in the script to do that. By having these properties available to us in the entity editor, so by using the properties section of the script to store the launch vector, it means that this launch vector is accessible in this entity editor over here. Now that is good for several reasons. One of them is I can now edit this without having to go into the script itself, so it's not hard coded. It also means that where I've created a template of these launch pads, they can have a different amount of force applied to each one. So for example, this one on top of this building, I've added 1500. I want to apply the force of 1500 to the player in the Y direction on that particular launch pad. So if I go up there by using these handy launch pads that are placed around the level, if I go up there and then walk on this launch pad, it fires me in this direction and I land, wow, on this roof. I missed that roof entirely and I land on this roof. So you can see, like, just by leveraging that property section, we can actually make each launch pad fire the player in a slightly different direction, which is good fun. And that was using the launch function from the Crayta physics API. Now, that's a slightly different thing to getting this ball to bounce around. So at the moment, if I run the game, when I walk up to this ball and interact with it, I can play keepy-uppies with it. So each time that I'm interacting with the ball, it's applying a force in the Z direction, much like the launch pad was as well. Except this time, it's not a character that I'm affecting, which is a player. It is a mesh entity. And that's slightly different. So in this character one, I launched it using the launch function. And in this launch mesh script, I'm actually using the add impulse function to launch the mesh. It works in almost identically the same way, like using the launch vector property, which I've set up here. So it's very, very similar, except this script is using the add impulse function, which is required for when you want to launch a mesh into the sky. And it's also, because I'm not using an on trigger enter function, I've created my own function here called launch. And what that means is I need to then get hold of whatever this script is attached to using the get entity function and then add the impulse to that. And this launch function won't fire on its own. So let's look at how we did that. if I click on the ball, you can see that in the entity editor, there's this onInteract event, and it says called when this entity is interacted with by a player with the player character. The hit result in this entity passed as arguments, an alternative to listening for onInteract in a script on the entity. So I could write onInteract. This could be onInteract like this, if I wanted it to be. And that would work in the same way that onTriggerEnter worked. But I can actually just call it whatever I want to, and then I can use this plus button to add functions to it. So I click the plus and then I add what entity I want to affect, what script attached to that entity, the function I want to call is in, and then the name of the function itself. So the event there. And that means that I can call this function whatever I want to, and I can call it from by interacting with the entity, but I could also call it from interacting with a different entity. I could call it from, some other aspect of the game. So that's an alternative way. So there's a couple of different ways of kind of using the physics API, but also a couple of ways in to scripting, if you like, in Crayta, and some fun things you can do with some of the physicsy stuff. If you want more information about these, the API, the application programmer interface in Crayta, then you can actually head over to developer.crayta.com. And you can see the API docs there. There's also a bunch of tutorials which you might want to work through if you're really interested in this stuff. But the API docs serve as essentially a library of lots of different functions that either get called by Crayta, like onTriggerEnter or onInteract, or that you might want to call yourself, like launch or add impulse. There's thrusters, there's add angular impulses if you want to make things spin. There's all sorts of different physicsy things that you can play with. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what people get up to with these things. I know there's some stuff that's been made already that is just mad, bonkers, and really entertaining to play. So I really look forward to seeing what you make, and I look forward to playing alongside you in Crayta.